try to be a new era alchemist. So essentially, face your fears and face your difficulties. So try to transform and transmutate, what's maybe raw and clear into golden opportunities. Be open, be flexible, surround yourself with people that know a bit better about your platform and technology, even younger people that can give you input to then achieve what's a shared, common goal. I'm Manu Madeddu, and this is SEO in 2026.
And what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
Well, I may have a lot, but I guess if I have to pick one, be flexible and be ready to face the unknown. That's the short version of my tip. But essentially, be prepared to adapt to all the new and broader challenges we have as marketers, and also be flexible enough and ready to absorb knowledge and data and information for things you might not know, but you need to explore now.
So how do you incorporate flexibility into an SEO strategy?
Good question. Long story short, try to maybe anticipate trends. So be flexible in be able to detect trends and adjust your strategy on the go. So don't be stiff and try to stick to what's planned maybe 6 or 12 months before, because trends may change swiftly nowadays. And also, you might find maybe users are changing their behavior. They're using maybe a feature now, a platform now, but they switch because of recent changes and technology advancements. So that's the kind of flexibility in terms of technology and strategy, but also be able to discuss and have a more holistic approach. So just don't focus on what you do, as marketer. I'm an SEO. So, SEOs tend to be working their silo in the cabinet and just focus on Excels and doing optimizations. Whereas now it's really about being flexible. So discuss with other teams, with other channels to find the best way to then achieve what are the business targets, not only for your channels, but overall.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned business targets there as well, because obviously SEOs have to be aware of that and work towards that, and perhaps have a 12-month target to work towards these business goals. However, the tactics that they use may change on a regular basis. How long is a reasonable time to have a tactics plan for then? Obviously you don't want to have, you'd be thinking about necessarily what tactics you're going to be using in 6 months, 9 months, a year's time. But is a 3-month plan for using certain tactics and then a review at the end of that 3 months a reasonable period of time?
Yeah, classic SEO answer, it depends. The best, I think the best strategy is to have an hybrid approach and balance. So essentially, especially if you work in big agencies and you work for big clients, you usually discuss the scopes, so the contracts and the budget on a yearly basis. So normally you tend to plan your strategy and covering 12 months, but you cannot be as granular as you should be, in the BAU, in what you do day to day or week over week. You can just block some key pillars, or say, for example, I'm going to have one technical audit every 6 months. Then for a specific market, we do, content audit or something specific. But then it really becomes to break it down, especially when it comes to content creation, because you need to follow seasonality, for example. And again, you need to be flexible because user intent, user behavior, might change, trends and interests may change. So you need to adapt, or even the business. Maybe the business, they're changing something internally, they're not able to create something, or they need to jump on another priority. So although you tend to plan and cover 12 months and have key pillars, key milestones in your strategy, then I usually tend to cover then more granularly 6 months, but then even heavily plan all the activity more regularly, like on a market base, on a more local base, every 3 months, and then rediscuss and review everything in a quarter, in a QBR, like quarterly review or retrospective meeting.
So I think many SEOs are familiar with the challenge of bright, shiny things coming along that look more interesting than what they're currently doing. But only a certain number of these bright, shiny things should be paid attention to. So how do you differentiate? How do you determine which thing you think to actually pay attention to and change your tactics to, and which thing to ignore and just leave alone and stop wasting your time?
Yeah, I mean, off the back of my experience, it depends on which client and at which scale you're working. Normally, the bigger the client is, the more difficult it is to tackle all the shiny and nice challenges because one, you need to open a business case, or maybe there are higher, bigger concerns about security when it comes to new implementation and new things. So you normally need to discuss how to do it, why you need to demonstrate the value and open a business case or even share use cases. The smaller the client is, I mean, given you demonstrate, there is value in doing something, the easier they can change stuff, literally and physically on a website, for example, but also they're more keen to explore. So it really depends. Normally, I would say, as an SEO, yeah, the bigger the client is, the broader the strategy is. You do tend to plan more in advance and more on around strategical KPIs and targets. When it comes to testing something specific, again, it's more about maybe spending 1 month, demonstrating the value, doing a bit of a forecast, and then demonstrating how to do it. If multiple teams are involved, because maybe there are 2, 3 teams, Martech, the devs, to implement recommendations or to discuss, the longer the time is required usually because they've got their priorities. Also, if you work on fintech or e-commerce or like very large brands, I used to work for Vodafone, for example, or Community Fiber. So they have a lot of highest priority when it comes to IT or development because they've got all the customer login, like broadband issues. So really, sometimes technical SEO. So if you go to them and say, listen, we need to optimize the sitemap. Yes, it is a priority, but at the end of the day, the website is not burning. The business is still receiving revenue. So it really becomes a conversation of, the backlog that the IT have, and then when we can prioritize things.
Okay. And we've talked about which shiny thing to pay attention to, but you'll hear of these different new things through different outlets, media outlets, different websites, different people on LinkedIn. How do you decide who to pay attention to? Because there's so much information coming to you.
There is so much noise. I think it's becoming too much, and I mean, having diversity and having a lot of people and share interest, it's key. I think one of the best things and elements and factors we have in the SEO community is because it's open, everybody can share, give back to the community. But there is so much noise. I mean, it becomes confusing to one really identify opportunities and really evaluate. Okay, this is good data. This is just noise. There is a bit of that, and maybe you end up maybe following some people that you take as consistent and reliable, then specific on interesting things, because I'm following a lot of like very good experts SEO. When they share some gold nuggets, like, I don't know, you can do this in Search Console to detect an opportunity, and then you can implement your clients. Well, yeah, this is exciting, but then again, you need maybe 1, 2, 3 months to convince the client. So you lose traction. I think there, as an SEO, it's really vital to have side projects like Side Hustle or maybe your own website where you can test small things, and also to be able that way to demonstrate the value because you're already testing yourself firsthand.
One other phrase that you use is avoid silos. I guess there are pros and cons with this, with SEOs working as a team together or SEOs working as part of maybe several digital marketing teams, perhaps with one representative from each type of marketing. Do you have any preference now? And what are the pros and cons of different types of working?
I think it's becoming vital especially for SEO, because back in the day we were all discussing working holistically, the need of SEO to be central, and then having a cross-channel approach. I mean, for context, I used to be self-employed for 10 years, and I wasn't an SEO. I was doing marketing, so I was doing paid campaigns, I was doing newsletters. I was the one touching the Facebook for clients at the same time as the website. So it was easier to have like an holistic approach, like a broad view of what was needed. At the end of the day, it wasn't SEO; it was maybe SEM, so search engine marketing, like optimizing whatever was needed. to place your client, in the place required to then convert. Nowadays, and when you work on large agency, large group, large teams tends to just work on silos just because it's easier. The client it's large, then you've got KPIs you need to achieve. Because the search landscape is changing, because the technology is changing, so essentially the user journey, is not linear anymore. Back in the day, the users were educated, they learned themselves to use search engines to essentially have a kind of conversation. So they need to find an answer for something they were looking for. They were going to a search engine, although the search engine was an answering machine, but you were starting with one query and then a second query and then a third query. So after 10 queries, you had an answer. Now the technology advanced. So we've got AI reviews, we've got AI mode, we've got LLMs. So users are starting to use those to have a conversation and then eventually come back to Google, to the website to convert. So everything's changed. In this scenario, as an SEO specifically, you need to be aware of, what the different users, personas, what's the fruition, how they use the technology to, at the end of the day, find the answer for what they're looking for. So what's the intent? And then evaluating opportunities cross-channel. For example, I don't know, for a specific client, for a specific intent, we see the users are using TikTok, the majority. So what's the opportunity for the SEO to maybe, I don't know, share data, persona strategies, or, what's the opportunity for SEO to align with social media management, both paid or organic, to then tap into the opportunity. So it's really becoming diversified, and for marketers, specific SEO, because we see the huge drop in clicks because people are using less and less search engine, they're using other means, but the conversions are increasing. So at the end of the day, Google search engine, like I call them now the dino search, essentially the standard classic organic search approach. It's a bit fading. It's moving towards a more of a conversational approach, so which is diversified. Multi-platform, but there is still value in using search engine. There is still huge value in website, because this is what people are using. So it's really acknowledging all of this and then starting to understand, how AI is being used on paid campaigns. So where is the opportunity? How the users are converting? So what can we do? So essentially, there are gaps, because you cannot know, as a marketer, you cannot know everything. But I think the key is, again, to be flexible and maybe surround yourself by people that know a bit more about specific, platform and usages, and then discuss together to really nail the opportunity.
You mentioned TikTok there as well. So if ideally an SEO could sit in a team of multi-disciplines, lots of different marketing roles, what roles should they work most closely with, and what can they learn from those roles?
Again, I work in a very big agency. So we have large teams, we have large clients. Plus, it's an umbrella of agencies, partner agencies, under one name. So I work for Publicis, and the Publicis, I'm part of Starcom, and I'm also part of Performix. And then it's either we work collaboratively with agency, for example, they're doing development of social media, or we work with other teams that are covering other aspects. I think, this conversation is becoming more about who knows the data. So who owns the data? Who can give the strategical input to then, coordinate the conversation between the other teams? So I would say no specific roles, but based on, the specific clients and what channels and verticals you can, act on, really evaluate which levers you can pull. Ideally, everything. So if you can, act on affiliate, display, paid media, organic social, PR, blogging, microblogging, influencers, I would say, again, based on the client, based on the business goals and targets and budget, ideally, all of those verticals. So you must have an understanding, or you must have a way to at least influence. Then it becomes a discussion of, you're working on a small client, they don't have a budget, then what to prioritize. There is a trend to really, SEO is losing clicks. So the first reaction is to put the budget from SEO to paid media, just to compensate. So really, SEO and paid media is becoming more of a marriage maybe, or of a due relationship in marketing. So you see that across all the agencies. But then really social media is becoming very important as well, which is something that there's always been there, but now it's becoming more priority because of the technology advancement.
Manu, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
Again, if I have to summarize, I love to say, try to be a new era alchemist. So essentially, face your fears and face your difficulties. So try to transform and transmutate, what's maybe raw and unclear into golden opportunities. Be open, be flexible, surround yourself with people that know a bit better about your platform and technology, even younger people that can give you input to then achieve what's a shared, common goal.
Manu Madeddu is an SEO director at Publicis UK. Find out more over at zerodewdesign.com. Manu, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thank you. See you soon.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at SEOin2026.com.